process has got to be changed, and he's going to have some ideas about it. And I think many people on the Hill also think that because of the low ratings that you spoke about, Gordon, they've got to do something with their image. This goes back to the check bouncing, walking out on the restaurant bills, and now this affair. And they are going to have to deal with this process of confirmation.
George Bush could have done something to improve the nominating process himself by coming up with a more credible and impressive nomination to begin with.
All of this is a fallout from Bork, though, right? All of this is political fallout from...
Yeah, well, that's what Specter was doing.
Specter
was covering his tail because he voted against Bork. He's coming up for election next year, and he thought that by trashing Anita Hill, he would save his reputation with conservatives in Pennsylvania, but he may have lost a lot of women and black votes.
As if you had extraordinary psychiatric insights into the
There's only one person in this panel who can claim that.
And I'm speaking as a non-professional here. I think the real swing senators was not Specter and the others, but the 5 Southern Democrats, including Sam Nunn, who were against Bork but who came out in favor of Thomas. These were people who listened to their own constituents, who watched all this on television. This was an unmediated event. Everybody watched, everybody saw, and they came to the conclusion, the voters, that Anita Hill was not telling the truth and that Thomas was. And these senators were not inventing reasons, that they listened to the polls and they went that way.
Of course, the big difference between this and the Bork business was that Bork had only ideology to contend with. And here you had an overlay not only of racial politics, but sexual politics as well.
But there's another difference. With Bork, it was the women and the blacks together against him. And in the end, the blacks, 7-3, according to the polls, came out in favor of Thomas. And that, I think, was extremely decisive.
What kind of a justice will Clarence Thomas be, Juan?
Well, actually, I'm worried about that issue. You know, as more I think about it, he's a guy who's now been terribly browbeaten by people. I think actually the experience certainly would make for a justice who's very sensitive to individual rights and privacy. But nonetheless, he's going into the arms of Scalia and Rehnquist and the right wing, who are going to say to him, you know, we're your true friends. He's going to be, of course, as a young man, 43, kind of insecure going up there. I hope that he's able to retain some of his bullheadedness and be strong and be a man of principle.
Well, one bit of silver lining here is, leaving aside the open question of whether he was telling the truth or not, he showed himself capable of a kind of an intellectual passion and a gutsiness that he had not shown during the
intellectual passion or political passion?
Oh, both.
Well, I don't care where you come out on this. That was an amazing show of strength. I think that guy took all of that.
Can I just make a quick deal?
Real quickly.
It's ironic that one of the first cases he'll hear is on pornography. And the other thing is, a lot of people think the Republican Party is going to win a lot of blacks out of this. You wait till Bush vetoes the Civil Rights Bill and Thomas casts a few votes. No big switch.
President Bush's political people have to be overjoyed. The Democrats are bumping into each other. We have the president has the Thomas victory, the Gates victory in the Senate Intelligence Committee on Friday. The Senate failed to override President Bush's veto of the jobless benefits, extension of the jobless benefits. And you can even argue that he was successful in fighting this House bill on the banning of certain automatic assault weapons. Politically, he's doing very well. What?
He seems to me right now to be on a roll, as he would put it. But the problem is that George Bush has to turn around and look back at the domestic agenda. And that's what all the Democrats who are lining up across this country are pointing to. They're talking about unemployment. They're talking about that economy that looks worse and worse as we come toward the end of this week. We're talking about people in more and more need of education in poor schools and all of these issues. But here in Washington, George Bush is on a roll and politically looks invulnerable at this moment.
And as for the unemployment benefits, he has the considerable advantage of being basically right. I mean, he's saying to the Congress, if you're going to extend these unemployment benefits, you've got to come up with the funds to pay for them. You cannot rob Peter to pay Paul. You can't exacerbate the budget deficit.
$6.4 billion.
Yes, but let me tell you that you've got government by one president and 34 members of the Senate. And sooner or later, somebody discovers that this is not leadership. This is the politics of frustration, of thwarting the will of the majority in Congress, including a lot of Republicans. And you wind up losing when you carry this on long enough.
What did you make of that assault, the House vote on the assault weapons? This is in the wake of the largest massacre in America.
I mean, it wasn't a victory for Bush, by the way, so much as it was a victory for the National Rifle Association, which is an institutional disgrace in this country. And as recently as last spring, it looked as though finally the stranglehold that the NRA has over the Congress was finally being broken, and the Brady bill passed. Now there seems to have been a lot of backsliding, and it is a real shame.
Well, why does the president have to bend the knee to these guys? I mean, these people.
Well, but there's also
not just men. I don't mean.
But it's also a problem of public opinion. I mean, this is the one Western advanced industrial country which has a love affair with guns, which it seems unable to give up. Every other country in the West has very strict gun control laws, and here it's just impossible to get them through. The NRA argues, sometimes effectively, I think it's demagoguery, but effectively, that if you restrict guns, you're going to take it out of the hands of ordinary citizens and not out of the hands of criminals. But there's a third class of people, and that is nutcases. And we saw an example of that in Texas. And the one strongest argument for gun control is that it makes it hard for a nutcase to get his hands on a gun. A criminal perhaps will have the guile to go and to find one on the black market. But people who are extremely unstable and dangerous, like the murderer in Texas, are going to have a lot harder time if the weapons are unavailable.
And to be very specific about that, he might have killed fewer people if this law had been in effect, because one of the things this law would do would be to ban magazines with more than, I think, 7 bullets in it. He was able to legally buy magazines with something like 17 or 18 bullets in it, and was probably able to commit more mayhem than he would have otherwise.
Well, you know, there's another point to be made here. It's not just madmen. You know, I live in an urban environment, and I've always lived there, and that's where you see most of these murders occurring. And the people who are getting guns now are people who are young guys out on the street messing around, and those guys have guns, and they have automatic weapons, and they get them cheaply, and they get them readily, and that didn't exist before.
Right.
We have a different situation in this country, and I don't think that the nation's politicians have caught up to it, in large part because of what Strobe was saying. The NRA has managed to absolutely pervert the thinking on this issue.
And the city where we live, where you live, has the toughest gun control laws in the nation.
Well, yeah, but it's a big leak because of adjacent states of Virginia and Maryland.
Right. It's got to be a national gun control or it can't work.
Strobe, is the president vulnerable anywhere politically? What about the economy? The news isn't good. Consumer prices are up.
You remember from days of yore the misery index, which was the total of inflation, interest rates, and unemployment. And while the misery index is nowhere near what it was when Jimmy Carter lost to Ronald Reagan, the trends are not good. I mean, just this past week there were some disturbing developments on the inflation front, and of course that means that the Federal Reserve is going to be a little less inclined to lower interest rates and try to pump up the economy because it doesn't want to exacerbate inflation, and we've already talked a little bit about unemployment. So, yeah, that is the president's one area of vulnerability.
No, I think he has another two-stroke, and the other actually has to do with women. I think women are highly incensed after what has taken place here in Washington in terms of the Thomas hearings. I think there's a lot of anger at Republicans generally, but at Bush.
The women I know are, but I'll tell you, you look at the polls, and women, like the people polled in general, tended to side with Thomas.
No, I don't doubt that. But what I'm saying is, put that in combination with abortion, which I think is the absolute Achilles heel for the Republican Party going into '92, because the platform fights about abortion that are forthcoming are going to be divisive and are going to say to women, this party could be the party that will take you back on that issue.
Well, abortion is the weak point, I agree, for the Republicans in terms of issues. But I think that the fallout of the Thomas nomination is that the women's groups, the ones who are the public so-called spokesmen for women, are essentially without a constituency. On this issue, they were way out in front, and the polls were directly against them, even among women. And I think that also applies to the civil rights leadership, also very strongly opposed, and yet in the end, there was a very strong grassroots support for Thomas. I think there's going to be a crisis in leadership of those groups on whom the Democrats have depended because the people aren't following.
Well, I will say this. I was surprised to see less effective political action by women's groups, and I wonder what in the world ever happened to the NAACP and Benjamin Hooks. Did you notice that in the last days of this Thomas fight, they were nowhere to be seen as far as I could determine? They weren't out there bringing on any grassroots people. But let me add a third area of vulnerability. Tip O'Neill used to talk about the fairness issue. In vetoing this business of extending jobless pay, President Bush wants a cut in the capital gains tax, which is only going to help the people who got richer as poor people got poorer, and that is going to be a big issue in the next election.
Have the voters caught on to that yet, though? I mean,
think
the polls seem to indicate they're worried about the economy, but in terms of specifics, such as you just mentioned.
Well, if the Democrats ever get smarter than they were during the Thomas hearings, they'll make sure the voters catch up.
But Carl, I'm with you. I mean, I'm against the capital gains cut, but as a political issue, the Democrats ran on the fairness issue in 80, 84, 88, and they got crushed. It doesn't seem to be an issue that they can articulate in a way that's convincing, because given their history of managing the economy in the 70s and also the mess they made out in Congress, people just don't believe that Democrats are the smarter alternative in handling any aspect of this economy, the fairness issue or the growth issue.
I don't think you're quite right. I think that the polls have changed. I think one of the key things that American pollsters are telling political reporters like me right now is that many Americans now say the Democrats actually may do a better job of handling the economy than the Republicans in the aftermath of S&L, in the aftermath of recession, all this kind of stuff. And that's a key change. You ask pollsters, they're shocked at that. And one of the reasons that they think that that's a problem for President Bush is because he is going to have to say to the American people that they are better off than they were 4 years ago. Ronald Reagan's old line, and he can't do it.
But
which brings us to Mario Cuomo, who's singing that song over and over and over and over to anybody who listens.
I mean, we're talking about Democrats as a species, which is understandable because they have not yet produced a front runner in next year's presidential race. But when they do, then I think a lot less will depend on the populace's sense of what the Democrats, plural, stand for, and a lot more about their reaction to one man, or maybe a couple, and their specific programs.
The couple being?
Well, you know, Harkin, Kerry, Clinton are all plausible. Cuomo, I guess, is plausible, but for this observer of the whole scene, it is really getting to be a very boring show, I'll tell you.
The Cuomo show?
Yeah, it's Hamlet in the 432nd act. Will he or won't he? Does he want to be or doesn't he want to be?
Hamlet never won an election.
You know, one thing that the Democrats have to watch out in all this talk about the economy as a problem for President Bush is that typically the Democrats control the state houses in many cases, control the state legislatures, the city councils, and that's where people are getting fired. That's where the problems are occurring. That's not helping the Democrats.
You know, it's gotten to the point where they call him no-go Cuomo, and if he goes, it's going to be such a shock that he'll have a good little head start.
Maybe he'll give a campaign and nobody will come.
I remember that song they sang at the Gridiron when you were the president.
Yeah, that's where his pants almost fell off when his suspenders broke. But I think he may be brave again one of these days.
I don't want to leave without speaking about Secretary of State Baker, who has won Israel's agreement to a Middle East peace conference. Now, dare we hope for a breakthrough on this one, Carl?
Oh, yes, I think we can hope for it. It looks as though they've settled the issue of who shall represent the Palestinians. And God, I hope that we are about to have a breakthrough.
Insofar as process is product in that part of the world, it's a good development. But the fundamental issue of peace for territory is still unresolved and not likely to be resolved anytime soon.
But the fundamental issue is whether Syria is serious in the process. And Syria did something earlier in the week which is destructive. It said it would not participate in the regional talks, which means Saudi Arabia will be out of it. And I think that's going to really hinder this peace conference that's coming up.
You know, we had David Kay, the guy who'd been in the Iraqi parking lot for so long here in Washington this week, and he said that Saddam Hussein's continuing his plans to try to bring nuclear weapons to that region, and that many of the people around the world, the arms suppliers, continue to supply. I tell you, it's still a tinderbox, and you just have to hope that Secretary of State Baker can do something with this peace conference at this moment.
Juan, you get the last word on Inside Washington. Thank you. See you next week.
Acquisition of this program was made possible by Friends of Iowa Public Television.
Those great musical memories are yours to love again on The Lawrence Welk Show. Join your favorite musical family each week on this public television station. Music, dance, and lots of family fun with America's Music Man. Don't miss The Lawrence Welk Show.
Join us this evening at 7.
Next time on Frontline,
Amazing.
an investigation of government mismanagement in the savings and loan bailout.
The biggest giveaway I have seen in the federal government since I have been here.
Frontline examines how presidential politics delayed action and magnified the problem.
I'd say we probably could have saved half of what we're now going to have to pay.
The Great American Bailout on Frontline.
Watch Tuesday at 8.
Iowa Public Television can
teach you,
lift you,
carry
motivate you.
It's television that makes a difference.
Empower you,
challenge you,
connect you,
jazz you,
razz you,
kid you,
enchant you.
Where else can you find it?
Involve you,
inspire you,
interest you,
move you,
entertain you,
calm you,
invigorate you,
excite you,
improve you.
It's TV worth watching.
Treat you,
surprise you,
tickle you,
startle you,
thrill you,
take you away,
bring you home,
heal you,
turn you,
toss
inform you,
transport
touch
you,
you,
enlighten you,
serve you. Iowa Public Television, a resource for Iowa's future.
From Cape Horn, at the southernmost tip of South America, the condor flies north. Over the Andes, above wilderness seldom visited and sometimes not even mapped.